Hello, and welcome to the 14th, I believe, in this series of workshops. And this one we're looking at Key 14, which is an Enact, a portrait. And there's quite a lot to pack in, actually. So we're going to crack on pretty quickly, if you don't mind. Uh, one thing that I am going to do for people who might like to have a look at the other video that we've done on this key, which was recorded this morning, my time, but last night, Viv's time. Um, it would probably be a good idea to have a look at that as well, because that was both. It was a very interesting um, example of the key and using Dorothy Heathcote as the subject, and that was very interesting. But also, as the kind of day wore on, and I reflected on how Viv had done that and organised that session, I started to think about the key in another way. So this example is really going to be really quite different with some different dimensions. So you kind of get the examples in the book, you get the example that Viv did this morning, and then you're going to get another example. There are like four examples of the same key, which we haven't done before. So
But
that's
wait, there's more.
pretty
Call now
exciting.
and get this free abdominizer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It just like get so much. So as I say, there is quite a lot to get through because I've just been all day. My head's been sort of buzzing with all the possibilities of this. So, Viv, if you could give me, can I share my screen now?
You
Have I got
can, I
permission
think.
to do that? I have.
Mm.
Great. So, can you see that?
Yep.
You can see my screen. Perfect. So, as I say, we've got quite a lot to go through. So, I'm gonna just go straight into the key, which is not the normal way that we do things, but I think tonight we will. So, I just want to talk first of all about the characteristics of a portrait and how this differs from using a picture, which we've done before, or a still image, or a photograph, or something like that. So a portrait could be a photograph, or it could be a painting. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. It's a deliberate attempt to capture something important about the person or persons in contrast to an informal photograph. So, an informal image or photograph is not the same as a portrait. A portrait is a deliberate, and it's contrived. It's made as a thing deliberately. It's usually, but not always, created by somebody who is not close to the person depicted. So if you think about in contrast to a photograph of a family, or a snapshot of the beach or something like that, it's often a family member or a friend that's taking that picture. Whereas a portrait is usually an artist or somebody in a professional capacity who's not actually related or close in any way to the people depicted. So that's another important difference. It's commissioned rather than a snap. So you ask somebody to do it, you commission them, often you pay them. There's often a financial transaction going on there. Who commissions it and why is important. If it's the person who's in the picture, that's one thing, but it might be commissioned by somebody else. And so the example that we looked at this morning, it was a portrait of somebody, Dorothy Heathcote, who died 10 years ago, and it was commissioned by an organisation. So that's a very different thing to what the one of the portraits that we're going to look at this evening, where I imagine that it was commissioned by the person in the portrait. So we'll discuss that as well and the kind of implications that that might involve. It often involves symbolic objects, clothing, colours, or backgrounds, and I will talk a little bit more in depth about that and how that can be realised in the classroom. So we're going to go into that into a little bit of depth. And photos. This is really what got my head really really going today when I was thinking about what we did this morning. A photo portrait is really quite different to a painting, as the subjects in a photo have more control over the way that they're depicted. And we're going to look at an example, I think, of that happening in a portrait photograph, which is not the same as a painting. So obviously, if it's commissioned by the person in the painting, I imagine that they have got quite a lot of control over how they're depicted. But as again, that example that we talked about this morning, Viv, of Dorothy, she'd have no control over it because she's died subsequently. So it's that I think is another dimension worth considering while we're kind of thinking about how you might use this key. So you can see there's an awful lot, isn't there, just in that list
Yeah, and I'm so
of
glad you pulled
different
that list together.
dimensions.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
this is where our conversation went this morning. What is the nature of a, or last night, what is the nature of a portrait and how is it different from other things? I think there's a really good summary there. Um,
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, so that was one of the things that yeah I wanted to pull together as a sort of as a bit of a list. Um, I'm just a little bit worried about the sound. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. All right. So I'll just carry on and hope that the sound is fine on the recording because that's obviously what you're getting your end of it. So let's move on. So I'm going to show you first a photograph which I imagine isn't a portrait. It's a photograph taken at a wedding. It's informal. It's fun. You know, the people in it are captured in a moment that they I'd be happy to remember. Probably or maybe taken by a professional, but maybe also taken by a family member or somebody else who was there at the wedding. And I'm going to contrast that with this photograph, which when I found it, I immediately fell in love with, because I think it's one of those photographs that just says so much, doesn't it? And you can see right away, I think, that the people in the photograph have got some agency or control over the way that they're depicted. Whereas if it was a painting, that would look quite different, wouldn't it? I think, or I imagine it would. What do you think? I might be reading too much into this. What are your views on this?
In a suitcase just along the corridor behind me, I have a number of family photographs, as on the left-hand side of the screen with that impossible waist, and on the
Yes.
right-hand side with that impossible bone structure. And
Yes.
I look at them every now and then, and especially the ones that are the equivalent to what's on the right-hand side of my screen, are wondering, the wedding that they've just been there for, and I imagine, I imagine things, I imagine stories around who they are,
Right.
where they are. Is that my great granddad, or do I, they're probably all relative ones in the suitcase along the corridor.
Right. And I guess then that they'll involve people that you never met. I mean, if
Yeah,
they're going back
yeah.
that far, yeah. So you don't know, do you? You don't know who they were. You weren't there. What
Um,
do you see that that's
on
revealed?
your question of agency, yeah, I've got something to say on that. But before that, because of your question about the deliberateness of the pose one, I've noticed the little sprig on the bottom of her dress on the right
Yes.
there, and the one on her waist as well, just kind of as though they've casually fallen from her headdress or something. Um,
Yes. Yes.
but I think, as someone who does paint sometimes, it's going to depend on the medium. But oil painting takes an awful long time to do. So there's a question also of some of the paintings can happen without the subject present often. Um, but I do think they do. They come and they have a look at it as it's drying, as the layers are drying. Often it's pretty surprising to have an oil painting made that you never see, unless you choose not to see it. So that yeah, I think it's whirring around in my head the answer to that question. In some senses, you've got less agency as the subject of a photograph because you've got to stand in front of the camera when the image is captured. Whereas as a subject of a painting, you get to stop and walk around and have a look and say, oh, well, can you do something different with my hands? So, yeah, don't know. I mean, you've got agency when you're in the photo because you place your hand in the position or whatever. Though, of course, there's always Photoshop. So it's a really interesting question to me, this one of agency, and I'd love to have that conversation with the students actually, and get them
Right.
thinking about it. Who's in charge of the image is such a great question.
Isn't
And,
it
and now
great?
we've got AI as well, right? Who's in charge?
Right, right, right. And again, that comes back, as you say, to who's commissioned it. So there's a very famous portrait story of Winston Churchill, who was actually painted after the war, I think quite a bit after the war. And he didn't see the painting. He wasn't allowed to look at the painting until it was revealed. And there's film of in the Westminster Hall where he's sitting there amongst all these people who just love him and admire him, and he's such a hero of the World War II, and he's sitting there, and then behind him is this great big portrait covered with a curtain, and then it drops, at the appointed time, and the artist is there standing there, and you can see Churchill's face. He's furious. He's absolutely furious. He hates it immediately. But of course, everybody has to kind of play along. There's a round of applause and cheers and all this sort of stuff. So what he does is he buys the painting and then he burns it. Isn't that great?
It's so great. Tim, I've got one more thought. As
Yeah,
always. The picture on the left, I agree with you, has a candid quality to it. But my daughter had engagement portraits taken of her and her boyfriend at the time, fiance at the time.
yeah.
And and they've got that quality to them, but they were completely staged. So
Wow.
the kind of tripping through
There's
the
another quality.
flowers or the munching a
Yeah,
piece of cake, it's entirely possible that photo on the left, I doubt it
yeah,
because it's like the 1950s, but if I saw that today, it could be taken in a studio. So it
yeah,
really just depends, doesn't it? It depends what the portrait artist is going for. And the
right,
definition of a portrait sort of ebbs and flows with whether it was deliberate or not. Um,
right.
if that was deliberate, it becomes a portrait. If it wasn't, it becomes a snapshot, maybe.
There's the difference, I think. I think that's the difference. Yeah. John, were you going to add something to that?
Um, about the right-hand side again, true and false, all sorts of levels about what is real there. How many times does he ever wear something like that, and what's the
Yes.
falseness about it? And in the background, there's a backdrop, isn't there? It's that window ain't real, honey.
No.
We ain't going to live in a posh place like that. Sorry, when
No.
when we leave today, you're going to find yourself in that whatever. So
Yeah.
you can see it's the backdrop because of the line across the bottom, and in the ones along the corridor here, it's the
Yeah.
same as backdrops
Yeah.
in those as well.
Right. Right. And I think there's a whole wonderful other inquiry here about photographs from what periods of time. So, as you're absolutely right, at this period of time, there wasn't the photographic technology to take pictures very easily. So almost all pictures were taken in studios, particularly if they were people, as you're suggesting here, without great wealth. I mean, there are photographs of people like Queen Victoria who were taken outside, but of course she was someone with enormous wealth, whereas ordinary people, I'm calling them ordinary, but people of, sort of everyday people, they would go to the photographic studio. And there probably wouldn't be a photograph of these two in a church or outside the church as we do now. We take photographs as we've got that one, obviously at the reception. So they would probably either have got married and gone down there, or they'd have done this before they got
Yeah,
married. But it is,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
it's in a studio, isn't it?
yeah.
The other thing that I love about this photograph are their expressions.
Mm.
That when I've noticed this a lot in these, particularly these studio type photographs. This might be the very first time these people have been photographed. They may never, they may, now we are so used to being photographed, aren't we? We know what photographs of us and other people look like. Whereas for these people, this may be like the first time, and you can't take it like you're saying your daughter did. She probably had like 100 photographs taken of the same thing, and then they just selected the ones that they wanted. This is probably the only one. It was so expensive to take a picture that you had to put the slide in and then expose it, and the third thing, which I love about these photographs, is that they're long exposure. So it's much more difficult for people to smile, because if you try and smile, it ends up looking like a grimace. It's
I also read somewhere or heard somewhere that we do a lot of reading into the facial expressions of these photos, but it wasn't the convention at the time to smile in photos.
right.
So even
Yeah.
in wedding day photo, it would have seemed very inane for them as classy people to be grinning. So, and
Right.
family portraits and things like that, they were to be poised and dignified. And we don't read it that way because we've got a culture where, grinning and smiling and showing your teeth is
Say
considered a,
cheese.
yes, well,
Mm.
it's considered a, and that I think was to do with the developing informality of photos, and that seeped over into portraits. But that that reads to us like she knows perfectly well she's not going to a very posh house. Um, but I don't think it would have read like that at the time. So that's also fascinating.
Right. Right. It's so fascinating, isn't it? It's
So
as soon as you this is
fascinating.
this is this is you can see why I got so interested in this when I started digging into it, because it was
Totally.
like, just by thinking about it as a different thing, as a portrait, and all the implications that go with that, plus all these other dimensions in terms of time and history and photographic technology and all those other things. I think it's absolutely
Because
fascinating.
they're a portrait of the people, but they're also a portrait of the time, aren't they? For the woman on the
Right.
right to adopt the body language and fashion of the woman on the left would have been completely socially unacceptable. Um, so that's about the time
Right.
as well as the individual people. So, and that's, I guess, why they become such useful ways for students to learn about the past,
Right. Right.
little
Right.
windows into the past.
The other thing, of
I
course. Sorry, John.
love
You go ahead. Yeah.
just to say, I love the
Yes.
continuity. Earlier on, I was talking about the impossible waste. There's an impossible waste in both pictures. I think if you look,
Yes.
and then I looked at the hands in both pictures, and they rather took me in terms of what you read by those about the relationships to each other, to the person taking the photo, to the moment afterwards.
Yes. Yes.
I like the
Yes.
moment afterwards and
Yes. Isn't
relax.
that? Yeah. That's really interesting, because you really get the impression that the informal photograph, the candid one, that these people know each other, and there's a love there, isn't there? I mean, we have to be careful, like Viv says, not to read too much into these things, but it feels like there's an intimacy and they're comfortable in each other's company, whereas the other two, as you say, this that may not exist. That may be something, yeah, and all the kinds of things of the possibilities of going forward and the implications of that. And it is, I mean, we as human beings, we always try and make meaning out of things, don't we? So one of the reasons that I was immediately drawn to this photograph was the contrast in their expressions, and also the formality of it, as you say, the way that he's sort of standing behind her rather stiffly, and she's sort of a little bit more casual than him. I mean, it's all there, isn't it? I mean, we obviously, as you say, we actually don't know anything about these people at all. We may be reading all kinds of things, but that's drama, isn't it?
Yeah.
Drama's that. It's about stories, isn't it? And
And that's
anyway,
portraiture too. We're invited
yeah,
to read things a certain way. They're arranged certain way. And there's so much continuity, as you say, John. Now you point that out to me. The tropes of Bride are there through two very different periods, and still today in a lot of cases. And we're still very, very shocked by people who choose to get married in a wedding dress that's very revealing. You know, we still kind of go, "Ooh, scandal."
Mm. Yeah.
So it's very interesting how we're still carrying those very traditional values about brides and what they're for and what they are. And yeah, fascinating.
The last thing I'm going to say, and it will lead into what we're going to do next, is that the time adds another dimension to this, doesn't it? So imagine if the photograph, the portrait photograph, the one on the chair, was taken in, let's say, uh, August 1915,
Yeah.
and he's getting married and hanging up, on the peg after he takes off this is a uniform, and he's off
Mm.
to
Mm,
fight in the war. That adds another kind
totally.
of layer to it, doesn't it? Another sort of, it changes things slightly, and again opens up another possibilities in terms of drama and story and all kinds of other things, doesn't it?
It also gives me goosebumps.
Anyway, yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what we're going to do next, if I've got this right, let's just have a move on to the next. Yeah, what we're going to do next is,
Sorry, shouldn't laugh.
again, slightly differently from, well, no, quite differently to the way that Viv did the workshop this morning. Um, is that we're going to look at a sequence, a little sequence that is actually going to be embedded in a larger curriculum subject, and it's aimed at younger children. So the one that we looked at, I think, would probably be aimed at older children when we looked at this morning. But this one is something that I've done many times with children in year one. So this is not something that's solely for older children. It actually works really well for young for young ones as well. So I just thought we'd run through this little sequence. So the way I'm going to talk about it kind of diverges a little bit away from the way that we do it with the
Yeah.
key, but I think that's fine because the key stands for itself and is quite self-explanatory. So the way that I do this is I show this picture to the children, and I say, we're going to start a story today, and it was a story about somebody who really lived, and here's a picture of him, and then I put this up here, you see, and I say this is a king, and this is a portrait of this king, as hanging up in his palace, and he's very, he wants people to see him like this. This is how he wants people to see him. So that's how I start. Okay, and we'll I'm just going to jump sideways now and have an adult conversation. Then I'm going to come back to the sequence if you don't mind. So just before I go sideways, one of the things, sorry, go forward. One of the things that I find very interesting about paintings, particularly portrait paintings, are the symbolism. So another thing I did today was that I've got a book on signs and symbols and other things, and I dug it out and had a look at some of the symbols in this painting, which I thought I'd share with you, but because I thought you might find it interesting. So here are the kinds of symbols that I've some of the ones that I've been able to find out about this picture. So you see there's a column in the back, and that apparently is an emblem of divine power. And then he's holding this kind of globe in his hand, and that's a symbol of power as well, and truth and abundance. But it's got a cross on the top, and that's a symbol of the church and religion and devotion. And then the colours symbolic as well. So purple is often a colour that's associated with royalty and wealth and status. Red is about activity and being virile and strength. And white is usually pure thinking. And then he's painted in red, white, and blue, which I
There
think
he
is
is.
even at this time was associated with being British or whatever. So even though it wouldn't necessarily share that with the children, I think it's worth kind of being aware of that. And one of the things I say is, what do you notice? Which is another key that we've done in the past. And if they start noticing things, then I've kind of got a bit of background knowledge that I can share with them.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. As a participant in this, I'm busy noticing, partly because you spent some time with previous portraits, so I'm like reading this like nobody's business.
Right,
And then,
right,
and secondly, when you apply those things, I wouldn't put them at first, but when you gave us some time and then added those, it was like quadrant three stuff. It was really
yeah,
delicious. And I suddenly got
yeah,
more interpretation. So I hear you on not necessarily, front loading the children, but it only added to the experience for me. Um,
right, yeah,
there are
yeah.
some lovely
It,
distortions in this painting. There are some lovely
go on.
distortions of like the way the body is presented. It's not a photographically realistic thing. And one of the really noticeable things is a very extended neck. Like his head is almost floating
Yes,
off his body, and his arms are actually quite impossibly short, so that we there's a very clear triangle between face and hands, and your eyes are just going between those three things. And there's also, not to be X-rated, but there's your eyes are very drawn into the groin as well. There's something going on there with what we're invited to think of as some capabilities, I think, very
yeah,
subtly.
yeah. That's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But
And
look at
it
the
feels.
head.
I
His
don't know
head could be
if
like a
if you
giraffe.
agree. I know it's well. Obviously, there's the painting itself, but there's also the costume, isn't there? It's a
Mm.
deliberate thing. I hadn't noticed that at all. But now you
The neck
mention it,
would be about that
I can't
long.
see it. Yeah,
It makes me
yeah,
want to actually emulate the shape. I've been
Yeah,
with my hands here. You
yeah,
haven't seen them, but I've been trying to. How can I get my finger that long?
yeah. It's
And
quite
I know.
distorted.
how heavy is the orb?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And you
tried to
didn't.
find out if there was. Sorry, go on, Viv.
No, no, no. I was going somewhere else. Sorry. I just thought because the orb is also the world, isn't it? He's got the
Mm,
whole
Yeah,
world.
in
Yeah.
his
in your
hand.
hand. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, the hands. I tried to find out if the hand, because it's very unusual, isn't it? The way he's holding. Nobody ever holds their hand like that. And I tried to find out if that was symbolic in any way. And I did a little bit of digging around, and I didn't really get anywhere. And people were sort of saying that artists actually hands are really difficult. You'll know more about
Yes.
this than
Oh
I do,
yeah.
but actually hands are really tricky. So artists would kind of, if you saw other paintings painted by the same artist, you'd find the hands would probably be quite similar because they kind of perfected a way of doing one, and that was a kind of neutral one. And so yeah, I don't think it actually symbolizes anything more
No,
than
but I love them
just
because they go the way he's holding the globe
yeah,
is like it
yeah,
ain't nice, and that finger
Right.
ain't.
ah,
It is, yeah,
that's interesting.
it's oogie. There's something oogie.
What
That's
can you say
interesting.
about him in the way he's holding something? Or
Yeah,
is
And
yeah.
I
he? I
think on a
find that
body,
interesting.
I'm sorry, John, carry on.
No, it looks like, is he inviting me to come closer because of this awful thing that I
Yeah,
can't do properly?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
ain't going anywhere close, and I
No,
don't want to bow either.
no, no.
Somehow the painter,
And
maybe they didn't intend to, but they've really got that across. I was thinking on a body level, I think our bodies, our cells in our bodies respond to the fact because this is why hands and faces and bodies are so difficult to draw because we know them more than we know any other thing in the world. And so there's a level on which we know intuitively that this is a bit wrong and a bit
yeah,
wonky, and we're reacting to that and kind of going, like you said, our bodies start
Mm.
it's not that it's inaccurate because I think it's deliberate, but it's definitely part of the artistry to have that distortion.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is I don't know if you know who this is. This is Charles II, and Charles II was the son of Charles I, and Charles I was executed. The, the only king of England to be executed by the parliamentarians, during the Civil War. So this Charles II, his son, fled to Europe and then waited in Europe and then was restored to the throne after the Commonwealth collapsed. Oliver Cromwell died, and his son Richard, I believe his name was, became protector. But then Parliament recalled the king. So this is Charles II coming back to Britain, coming back to be king of Britain. And of course, you can imagine a lot of the kinds of things that must have been going through his mind in those early years, in particular. They killed my father. I've got to somehow I've got to restore the dignity and the importance of the monarchy. They're being depicted in this, in different ways and representing different things was enormously important to him. And this painting is around, I think, is around about 5 or 6 years after he came back, so it's still quite early in his reign. So I don't know if that changes in any way the way that you look at the painting.
Am I? Yes, I am. It makes me wonder who the audience is. Where's he going to distribute this? Can it be copied? Who will be invited into the unveiling, and what will their brief be to tell? How do they tell the country?
Yeah. I don't know about the history of this painting, but I do know that Elizabeth I, I've read about this. She had many portraits painted of herself, and they'd go around the country on tour. So the portrait itself, they didn't copy the portrait, but they think that would be too expensive and difficult to do. But they would take the portrait on a tour of the country. So it would be Queen Elizabeth appearing in the Guildhall in Norwich on April the 5th, and then people would come in and have a look at it. So I imagine that, I mean, this is only what, 60 years later after the death of Elizabeth. So I would imagine this would be done the same kind of thing, probably. Particularly if you're trying to re-establish the monarchy, that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it?
It would have been shown by Wolsey's Gate at Ipswich, of course, as well.
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. Yeah, on its way up to Norwich. yeah, or on the way back, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, so let's pop back to what's happening in the classroom. So I'm just going to take away the bits of signing that I put on there and go back to the portrait as the children are viewing it. So here's an introduction to the king. They're talking about, they talk about the painting, whatever they notice. And then the way that I do it is I say, well, when I sit on the chair, I'm going to be the king. Okay. And this portrait is hanging in his palace. And this is how he'd like everybody to see him. So let's all turn ourselves into the king in his portrait, shall we? So all the children you see do, so you could be like this one, or you might be another kind of portrait of the king. You might be standing up, or you might have your family around you, or you might be with your dogs or whatever. But let's just imagine ourselves. So now, of course, now we're moving much more into the key. So the children are now thinking of themselves as the king or a member of the family or whatever in a portrait. So I talked to them about the fact this is how the king wants to be seen. So let's decide how we want to do that. So we'll do it together. Ready? 3, 2, 1. There we go, and relax. You see. So so we might now just kind of have a look at some of these portraits, might we? We might say, well, let's have a little walk around the palace, and we'll start with Viv, shall we? So let's have a look at Viv's depiction of the king. So Viv, are you ready just to go back to your portrait? Could you get that back there? Yeah, there he is. So what do you make of that then, John? That's you're not keen on that one.
Going. He's looking down his nose at me for sure.
Right.
I feel
So
very much less.
Why would he choose to be depicted like that then, looking down his nose? Why would he do that? What's he trying to convey, do you suppose?
Self-import. Well, I see. Yeah, for himself. Maybe
Yeah,
it's
remember
just.
it's for himself.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Perhaps he just has this image of himself as top of the tree.
maybe he
And
does.
he wants confirmation that he's top of the tree because, after all, he's dead.
Yes, of
So
course. Yes.
he needs to be seen
Yeah.
as
You can
being
relax now,
important.
Viv. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So carry on with that thought then. So because that do you remember that you saw how that shifted when we talked about who commissioned it? So this is a portrait that he's had painted, he wants painted. So he's chosen that image. If that's a portrait of that somebody else has painted of him without his, he wasn't the client, he wasn't the commissioner. Then there's a whole other inquiry there, isn't there? Because then it is this is him looking, I don't know, self-important and looking down his nose. But he's chosen this, so that changes
Ah,
everything, doesn't it?
but I bet he commissioned this one, and the artist has still conveyed some pretty unpleasant things about him. So that's what
Right.
artists do.
So just pause it there for a second. Just pause it there. So this is another aspect to this key, is that we can't talk to the portrait. We can't talk to the portrait because the portrait is a portrait.
Yeah.
I'm pretty strict on this. It's a kind of
Mm.
internal coherence thing. If you talk to the portrait, then you kind of breaking out from that convention. But you can talk to the artist. So let's imagine that Viv now is the artist. And now we can start talking to her about what she intended. So what were you thinking there, Viv, when you were, and what did the
Um,
king ask you to do? What was he,
Well,
what was his
it was it's very interesting answering this because I was inside the portrait a moment ago and now I'm outside the portrait looking at
Yeah, right,
myself.
right, right.
He wanted this picture of him, he wanted this portrait of himself in dominion over his country and his family. So elsewhere in the portrait are, below him are figures from his family and figures of the country. And he wanted it to be a sort of a paternalistic, protective, safe kind of figure with his arms out so that's what I was going for, that he was a benign patriarch.
So it feels as though because we were seeing it on Zoom, we only
Mm.
got a very partial picture
His arms
of
are,
what was, it's more like that. That does change things, doesn't it? Yes. And now that we know that he's surrounded by his children,
yeah, and his
then
and his children and his what would you call them? Subjects.
the subjects, yeah, yeah. So it kind of that changes things again, doesn't it? So what I'm gonna ask you to do now. So this is another step in the key. So John, if you can keep remembering what it was that you were doing, because so we're going to come and have a look at your portrait in a minute. But before we do, could you just pick up a bit of paper, and you can either draw or write this. Adults kind of tend to write it. Children, especially this age, would tend to draw it. Can you just write or draw what we can't see in the picture? So Vivs would say the king is surrounded by his children and subjects, and in the background is so it'll be what's in the background, what he's wearing, and any other people or symbols or signs that are in the picture. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to work on that and have a think about what else is in the painting. Let me know when you're ready.
You'll have to stop me.
I know. You're writing a book or something.
No, I'm trying to draw, but it's not particularly successful. But
Oh, okay. Well, John,
I took on
you
the
let me know when you're
challenge.
ready.
I took on the challenge of drawing because I'm one
Oh,
of
you're
those
drawing
ones
as
that
well.
holding it
yeah,
too.
Fantastic.
Hmm?
and it's
Great.
so
Yeah, no, great.
enjoyable to draw. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
good. It's good
yeah,
going off
brilliant.
the end of my
Brilliant.
biro.
Yeah.
But when people
Okay.
do draw, they take a lot longer over it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, as long as you're not in a hurry, I don't mind.
And as I'm drawing, I'm noticing myself making visual amendments based on the time that, the fact that this is the olden days, or as they would say in New Zealand, back in the day,
Back in the
which
day.
kind of means anything before about 1972.
I'm stopping there.
Yeah, I'll
Are you
stop there.
ready? Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So let's imagine now that the children are, they've gone off and they've been drawing just as you have. And now we're going to have a look at one or two of the other portraits. So we'll have a look at John's now.
Hmm.
So John, could you be ready to go back into your portrait? But just before you do, could you describe what we can see in the painting before you go back and give us a visual? So just you could hold up your picture like that
Oh,
if
sorry,
you've
this
drawn it,
one.
haven't you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
thought you. Yeah, no.
yeah.
Here I am with my picture.
Perfect. Right. Wonderful. Now, could you just tell us what it is? So, yeah, well, I think I'm pretty clear on everything there, but can you just tell us what you had in mind when you were drawing those things?
Every day while the sun shines and the moon rises and the sun goes down um,
Yeah,
and the moon comes up, he is aware as he sits there in the middle in his finery of the
yeah.
power of his navy, of the
Right.
number of
So,
animals throughout the land fenced in and kept safe to make
fantastic.
money from, and of the kind of castles that he will build.
Right. So if I'm visualizing this correctly, is he seated in the middle of
Yes, yeah,
these
yeah,
images?
yeah.
And are they painted in the background? Are they real or are they symbols of these things?
Um, no, I think they're highly accurate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like that
Great.
that
Okay.
that that ship there will
Okay.
have all the
Yeah,
ropes outlined, and
yeah,
the
yeah.
detail would be terrific.
Great. Okay. So, all right. So if you put the picture down, so let's now have a look at the way that the king is depicted. So you're going to do that inactively now. So if you could go back to what you were doing before and showing us the king.
Right.
Just
Showing
when you're ready,
on the screen.
when you're ready, when you've got to what you want, just hold it still and
Yeah,
we'll have a look at it.
I probably need to lose those.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
That's
Oh
Wow.
yeah, just hold it there. Don't speak to us. Just
Wow.
hold it there. What do you make of that, Viv?
He has got an intense awareness, like a really steely stare. He's looking, he's
Mm,
thinking. He wants people
mm,
to know that he's tuned in to his
yeah.
country. Yeah. And he's
It feels,
concerned.
yeah. There's an awful lot of kind of serious
Yeah.
power here, isn't there?
Mm.
Serious kind of don't mess with me, and the symbols, the castles, and the ships in the background, and everything is like on the center of all this, and and I'm.
Yeah.
But the other thing I think that's quite interesting is that he's not looking out of the
Yeah.
portrait.
No, he's looking down at his subject, at his thing. And you're saying, don't mess with me. I feel I'm getting much more of a concern, like I don't want to say godlike, but he's like he's thinking he's not saying to the person looking, don't mess with me. He's saying to the people down here, I've got you. I'm aware of you. I've maybe I'm
Ah, oh,
maybe
right, right.
I'm
Okay.
taken
Uh-huh.
somewhere by what John was saying before, but I'm
Yeah,
seeing it kind of
yeah,
really protective rather than
yeah,
hostile.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a very
Okay.
powerful
So,
facial
John, if you could
expression,
just,
John.
yeah, yeah, right.
And
So,
it's
if you
hard to
could just
hold.
relax, John. So, again, we're not going to talk to the person in the painting. We're going to talk to the artist. So, could we now talk to the artist? So, John, the artist. Um, could you tell us a little bit, John, about what the king asked you to depict? What was he? Did he give you any guidance on the facial expressions, or did he leave that up to you?
No, he was very, very specific about the direction of his gaze, and he asked for um, uh, um, his nobility
Mm,
and his sense of right and justice and understanding, his intellect. He wanted to be portrayed, and he wasn't afraid to say he felt himself to be of that ilk.
Mm, mm. Interesting. Would you mind if I asked you a question that you may not want to answer? Considering that perhaps the king might ask you to come back and paint him again.
mm.
But just between us, how would you describe his general kind of disposition? Did he feel like the way that he was portrayed, or would you
Come,
say he
come,
was
come a bit
more
closer to me and let me just whisper.
coming in? Yeah, sure. Well, listen, yes,
He
yeah.
he kind of leant forwards a bit like this to me,
Yeah.
and he said, "Of course, you will find a way of portraying me in that way, won't you? Because
Oh,
why not?"
oh, that sounds like a little bit of pressure he applied to you there. Yeah. Okay. Right. Now, so we'll pause it there. You see how different that is than if you talk to the portrait.
Yeah,
This is
fully.
this is, I think, one of the reasons why I think it's important not to break that convention, because it's much more interesting, isn't it? Talking to the
Mm,
artist.
mm.
You can get the same information, but it's through the eyes of the artist rather than suddenly we're talking to the king, which is it's not right. He's a painting, so we can't really talk to him, but we can talk to the artist. Thanks, John. That was great. That was
So
really
good.
great.
Good fun, good fun. That's the other thing
Yeah.
about it. It's good
Yes, of
fun.
Oh,
course.
so fun.
Yes, it's great fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
enormous
you.
fun. Yeah. So, um, so the next thing that I do in going back to the classroom, and the children now have explored all these paintings and they've sat back down again.
Mm-mm. Sorry to interrupt, but I
Cool.
want to see Viv's picture.
Oh yes, yes. Let's do that. Sorry,
And that
Viv,
is a
I'd
moment where you
forgotten.
hold your picture. Or
Yeah,
everybody in the
yeah,
room
Yes,
yeah.
holds
I mean,
theirs.
yes,
I
yes.
didn't feel hurt that I couldn't because I just enjoyed drawing so
No,
much.
I
But
felt excluded
there's a
by,
bit of
whoa.
Oh
a
gosh.
freeze along the bottom, the subjects, and I suddenly
Yeah.
realised, well, I shouldn't probably talk to you unless I'm the artist. But I was thinking about
So
the fecundity of Britain and all
right.
the things
So
it could
he's
do.
looking down on these people
Yeah,
around
these
him.
are
So
quite
they're
small
all around him.
scale at the bottom, kind of
Yeah, I get it.
like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
frieze along
nice.
the bottom, even
Nice.
lower than
Mm.
his family.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a
Yeah.
Bayeux tapestry moment along the bottom.
Oh.
And it
Oh,
keeps
right.
going. These
Okay.
are just three of them, but there's all these, very happy, industrious, productive,
Yes.
surfy types.
Yes.
Yeah, doing all the things that
Right.
England does at
Right.
this time.
And that's quite non-naturalistic then. So the children
No,
are kind of
uh,
more
that
in
is.
proportion. Yeah.
But no,
Yeah.
they're not in the same scale but they're very
No.
naturalistic.
No.
It's
Yeah.
painted.
Yeah. I understand. Oh, yes. Right. So different scale, but still naturalistic. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Sorry, I'd moved on without
Right.
asking you to show what you've done. Um, so the next thing that we're going to do, coming back to the classroom, is that I say that these paintings are all the ones around the palace, and that's his outward facing way that he would like people to see him, the way that we've represented him. But when we meet him in the story, he doesn't look like this. He doesn't look like the paintings. He looks like this. Like that, you see. So
Oh,
then I say, so come out of role, and then I say to the children, so what would a king have to worry about? What would a king be so worried about? And of course, they talk about all kinds of things, don't they? They say this and that, and you can imagine all the things that they say. So I
can I
say,
double?
well, go ahead. No,
I
no,
just
go
want to
on.
tell you how that felt because I knew that was coming because you mentioned it in the thing last night, but it was so
Yeah,
impactful as soon as I saw it again. It was, and what he's got to worry about, I drew on the things from my painting. I bet you did too,
yeah,
John. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry, I just had to tell you
yeah.
that that was
No, 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 no. It's
that was
great,
one of
isn't it?
those
Is that
inside
I
out
love that
moments.
juxtaposition.
Yeah, where you go, I
Yeah,
know what's coming, but
yeah,
oh wow, I just felt it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It works really, really well in the classroom because there's suddenly, we've created all this kind of expectation, and all the paintings, of course, have him in complete control and being all kind of, noble and grand and intelligent or whatever. And then suddenly you get him in a private moment, and that really kind of switches everything. And children, I mean, we haven't got time to go into the kinds of things that children come up with, but they often have very, very interesting ideas about, what would a king have to worry about. So we listen to those, and then I say, well, I don't know if you noticed, but he kept looking up like that, like he was looking out the window at something. And what I'd like to show you is what he can see outside his window, and that's what he can see. And of course, that's now introducing the Great Fire of London, which is the curriculum. And he's devastated because his beautiful city of London, now just remembering all the things that we know about this king, all the kind of he has got to be a great king. He's got to re-establish the monarchy. He's got all that mantle of responsibility, if we want to talk about it in that way. And what's happening? London's burning. It's like, and this isn't the only terrible thing that happened that year. This is 1666. There was also a terrible plague that year as well. So lots and lots of people had died in the months previous over the summer of a dreadful plague. So
Oh,
people were kind of behind their hands. They were kind of going, 1666. Well, you know what that means, don't you? Well, all this and we've restored the king. Well, he's the devil, isn't he? Look what's happening to us. God's punishing us. So you can imagine the kind of pressure he was under at that time. So getting the fire under control was absolutely had to be done and as quick as possible.
oh,
And at this point in the story, there's no one who's got any idea how to do that. It's out of control, and that is when the children enter the fiction.
that is
So
so
they come to see him as the firefighters who are going to put out the
yeah.
fire.
Oh, I see.
I've done it loads of times, and it just works like a dream.
That's
It's
so
such a
good,
great way of
Tim.
introducing them.
I've heard
Yeah,
of Fire of London 1,000 times. I've never studied it. Even as a kid, we never studied
no,
it. But I've never encountered it on the inside of the story like that. And just that
yeah,
little bit of humanity of the king and that little bit of, this really helped us to paint the world within which that thing, and then to see that's a moment, when you turn around, and even funny enough, the fact that it's painted, it's weird, but that kind of fits. Oh, that's so good because you know exactly what's burning. There's a city,
yeah.
but there's a whole lot of
Yeah.
dreams and his status and oh yeah, thank you.
Viv, Viv, you're stuttering.
It's all right. I've got you.
Viv, can you say that again? Because you were stuttering.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just very, very
I
effective
really
Can you
like
hear
way
me?
of dropping into the history from the inside. It's very good. I can see
it.
why you shared it with us. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. John, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, that's kind of my point as well. I I I really enjoy, well, two things to say. One is about the pace, what I'm always interested in, the pace you use and how you pause and take us forward at a certain speed. And now, wham a damn, it's another speed into this one, and we all go woo like this. What's the other one I wanted to say? Yeah, well, I know what it is. Um, what's for me, um, not knowing what they will do about firefighting or whatever, but you will have researched the area
Yeah.
so that you know that there are some choices. Um, this is a lovely way of not doing games and exercises as an introduction to the Fire of London. Let's all stand and make a shape of the flame.
Mm.
And so on. It gives it context without it gently gives it context, and now they've got purpose as well
Yes.
in order
Yes.
to be able to
Yeah.
deal with it. I have to. This is not meant to be a plug or anything, but I have to
No.
introduce you to my colleague Luke Dixon, who, surprisingly enough, in Alive and Kicking, is working in the Samuel Pepys mode.
Ah,
So
fantastic.
this is a really
Yes.
fertile area for
Yes.
all of
Yes.
us. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. One is that yes, Great Fire of London is a topic that children in year one, that most children in year one will study this topic, but both because it is great, kids love it, but also because it is really well resourced. So it is, it's one that I've been asked to teach many, many times, and I'm sure that's the same with Live and Kicking. I bet you're very popular doing that, going around visiting schools. And of course, Samuel Pepys fits in very nicely to this. The second thing is the kind of the dramatic stuff of being the flames and the smoke and the you know that's all coming. There's not
Yes,
that's
of
not
course it is.
either
Yeah,
or.
yeah,
It's just that we're
yeah.
going to be doing that later when we're fighting the
Of course.
fires. Well, what are these flames like? Are they roaring or are they, smoldering embers or whatever? So that's all coming up. It's just this is, as I say, I just found this as a great way of introducing the topic as a kind of way of edging in, but also giving the children a good idea of what's going on in the story. So that the third thing I'm going to say is that, and I think it was implied in your first point that you made, John, is that the children don't know what they don't know. So if you ask them to come into the story as firefighters, they're going to think of firefighters that they know in fire engines and splashing lights and pumping water. So there's another picture which I haven't got here, but is actually used in a key that I think we'll look at another time, which is a woodcut from the period, and it shows in a kind of stylized way what the firefighters were doing, what they had. So so I say to the children, well, come into the story and help the king, but that would be great. I'm sure he'd be really appreciative. But unfortunately, we don't have fire engines, we don't have pumped water, we don't have, safety equipment, we don't have kind of extendable ladders. So here's a picture of what we do have. And then I introduced the fact that we're fighting a fire in 1666. So that's how we're gonna be doing it. Yeah, because as you say, I mean, they need to know what they don't know before we can actually enter into the fiction. So that's pretty much it. I don't think. Oh yes. So I just there's a couple of things that I just wanted to say. The avoid hot seating thing. That's the point I was saying earlier about not talking to the king. Don't hot seat the king. Talk to the artist and come in more subtly than that. Um, and that's the same thing in terms of the coherence. Treat the portrait as an object, not as something that can be interacted with, and consider engaging with the artist.
Mm.
This makes sense sometimes. I think it made sense in what we were doing there, because we were kind of imagining ourselves walking around the palace while the king was still alive. It might not make so much sense if we were looking at the portrait 400 years later. We couldn't talk to the artist if we were doing that. So there's a little bit of coherence there just to pay attention to, really. And that's, yeah, so we covered this really in the first workshop, and it's something you're familiar with already, John, but just to think about how you plan the key, and you could see the characters that we use, the locations, the events, the time, and then when the tension came in, how that was introduced. And then, of course, the focus was the Great Fire of London, which was revealed as a wonderful kind of shock, if you like, as a big surprise, rather than something they knew from the start. And we're back. So have I stopped sharing my screen now, just to check, because I can't tell this in.
No, you haven't.
Can you just see?
We can still see it.
I haven't stopped sharing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can work out to stop sharing it.
There should be a big red stop share button.
There's a big red button saying stop sharing. now I've stopped it.
It was doing this at you.
Trying to help. That was very cool. Thank you, Tim. That was really nice variation.
Thank
you. Lovely. Yeah. I have just a chance to be together with you both this evening. It's like, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, John. Can I just ask before I forget? Are you going to Lisa Stevenson's conference on the 7th of February?
In February.
I'll just press stop on the recording, and we'll say goodbye to those who are watching later. So and then we can carry on chatting. So thanks very much.